2 weeks ago, the Swiss Federal Council announced that the S residence permit that was issued to Ukrainian citizens in 2022 after the war broke out will not be revoked or cancelled before the 4th of March 2025. So far so good, but what does that mean? Can Ukrainian citizens expect to stay in Switzerland after that date? After March 2025? And if so, what would the terms and conditions be for that? To answer this question, we first need to take a step back and look at why the S permit was initially granted for the very first time in February 2022. So after the war in the Ukraine started in 2022, the Swiss Federal Council activated the S protection status for the very first time for Ukrainian citizens. Unlike many other residence permits, the S permit only provides temporary protection in case of a serious general threat. And at the end of October 2023, 66,000 Ukrainian citizens were registered with an active S status in Switzerland. The question now is, how long will the S status be valid? Well, as for now, there is no clear answer to that question. And the reason for this is that the S status and also the S residence permits that were issued with it will be revoked by the Swiss Federal Council once the situation in the Ukraine is considered more stable and safe again, and when there's no longer a serious general threat. And as we know now, the Swiss Federal Council does not expect this situation to happen before March 2025. And the big question that many Ukrainian citizens that live in Switzerland right now have is what will happen to them after this date, meaning after March 2025. Because if they arrived in Switzerland in March 2022, they will have been living here for almost exactly 3 years in March 2025 and maybe even longer if the war doesn't stop by then. That means their children will have gone to school here, elder children will have started an apprenticeship, the adults will have found an employment here and or new friends in Switzerland, and they will have gotten closer to the Swiss culture. Therefore, there might be some S permit holders that wish to stay in Switzerland for a longer period of time, if not for an indefinite period of time. Will that be possible? It's actually hard to tell right now because the S status has never been granted and therefore never been revoked before, and therefore the consequences are not clearly defined yet. So a task force was put in place by the Swiss government to regulate all this, and they are now suggesting that once the situation is safe again in the Ukraine, that there will be a time period of 6 to 9 months during which Ukrainian citizens will be encouraged and actively supported to return to their home country. Most likely, this will include financial aid as well. An exception is provided for apprentices though, meaning for people that started an apprenticeship in Switzerland. They shall be allowed to finish their apprenticeship first before they return back to their country of origin. However, in my personal opinion, as an attorney working in migration law right now, I can imagine that, as always, there's gonna be some exceptions to this rule. And these exceptions are gonna, again, in my personal opinion, depend on two very important aspects. The first aspect is going to be whether or not a person has an employment in Switzerland that serves urgent needs of the country. And the second aspect is going to be whether a person has the necessary language skills that are required for receiving another type of residence permit here. Now, why do I think so? Since the Swiss government is now actively investing in integrating Ukrainian citizens in the domestic labor market in Switzerland, it does, of course, afterwards have an interest in keeping these people working here if there's otherwise a lack of employees in many work areas, such as, for instance, in the healthcare section, where caretakers for elder people are in great demand. This is why, in my personal opinion, I can imagine that the Swiss government will be willing to offer some B residence permits to Ukrainian S status holders once the S status will be terminated, if they manage to provide some proof that they integrated into the Swiss labor market and that they actively work in a job where there's otherwise a lack of employees. In addition to that, they will most certainly also have to provide some proof that they are no longer depending on any sort of financial government aid, meaning that they are financially independent. The other aspect that will certainly be reviewed when deciding whether or not to grant a more definite residence permit to an S permit holder will be their language skills, because speaking the national language abroad in a foreign country is the key to any integration, and therefore this aspect is always reviewed very carefully when deciding whether whether or not to grant a residence permit to foreign citizens or not. And although many foreigners that live in a big city such as Zurich or Geneva always argument that they can easily get by speaking only English, this is not enough to get a definite residence permit in Switzerland, because the national languages here are German, French and Italian. So although there is no clear answer yet to what the future will hold for Ukrainian S permit holders that are living in Switzerland right now, integrating into the domestic labor market and learning the language at the place of their residence as soon as possible and as best as they can is certainly the best chance for those who wish to stay in Switzerland for the long term. With this, we're now getting to the end of today's video, and I hope that it was helpful to you. If so, make sure to give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments down below if you would like to see more of this content. You can also leave any kind of additional questions in the comment section down below and I'll make sure to answer them. Other than that, as always, thank you guys for watching and I hope to be talking to you again soon.